Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to be discussing BIM Level 2, the impacts of that on product manufacturers, and how to get involved in BIM as a product manufacturer. I hope you find it informative, and we'll start straight away. When it comes to the benefits of BIM, the UK government for the Construction 2025 targets looked at four headline figures: 33% lower cost, 50% faster delivery, 50% lower emissions, and 50% improvements in exports. And on the face of it, those numbers seem really high and really ambitious. But when you start looking into the impact of BIM on each of these numbers, there is a significant impact that we can make through better processes, better technology to reduce waste. In terms of the cost, 33% lower cost. So much of our process for designing and delivering buildings has incredible waste. Materials coming to site and never getting used, variations in the design process, siloed working. So when you start looking at that number of savings around BIM, the 33% is probably one of the most realistic targets on the Construction 2025 targets. Faster delivery has always been a challenge. It's been something that the industry has said we can't do because every site is individual and it's tricky to make things faster. But when you start looking at what's happening elsewhere with pre-manufacture, things being built off-site, things being coordinated off-site and brought together and put together, 50% starts looking more achievable. In terms of lower emissions, the embedded carbon in our buildings is significantly higher than it needs to be, and a lot of that is procedural. By not designing in the most sustainable solution from the earliest stage, and then not being able to change that later on because we've come too far down the line to choose the right materials, the right processes to build that building with a lower emission, we're not doing ourselves any favours in the way we build things. So if we do involve our manufacturers earlier, we can take advantage of all the R&D and innovation that they're doing to get the best products for the site and really make the project sing in terms of lower emissions. But for me, the 50% target, I think that one's too ambitious personally. And as for the improvements in exports, we already sell £1 billion worth of UK services out into the world, but we do import £6 billion worth of materials, and that kind of has to change. So shifting that balance, if we use more UK-based manufacturers, sell our best practice to the world, a 50% improvement on what is now a significant loss can be achieved. So whilst we've looked at the high-level benefits of BIM, when you start looking at BIM in more detail, what's it actually about? I think BIM gets confused with every other digital initiative in the whole construction sphere. BIM is actually relatively well defined, and it's about a more efficient way of collaborating on construction projects. And through that efficient collaboration, we can improve our design, which removes a lot of the surprises and gets those difficult decisions around details earlier in the process. And of course, there's a 3D model. The 3D model isn't the be-all and end-all of BIM, but people think in 3D. Construction people learn to think in 2D to be able to draw in plans, but that doesn't mean people that we're showing them to can read it. And when you have a 2D world, there's always the difficult section that you didn't draw. In a 3D world, those issues can be addressed. So it's not sensible to minimise the impact of a 3D model on a project. It's just not the fundamental of level 2, but the model is a key component to improving the design. It also helps reduce risk. If you have a set of models, including the right products from the right manufacturers as early as you can into the model, so you know the sizes, you know the dimensions, you know where your pinch points are, you can start going through a clash avoidance process, sometimes referred to as clash detection, where you set the models against each other, set your tolerances, and have a look where they might cause trouble for each other. And then you resolve that. So the lead designer would make decisions on whose model needs to change. So we have this shorter iteration of resolving clashes, rather than finding out on site that a pipe hits a piece of steel and we need to redesign things. So that coordinated information is incredibly useful in terms of the design process, but it also means that we can have a structure to our data. So the clients making decisions on whether to proceed from stage 2 to 3 will have a better set of data in terms of area schedules and how many doors and windows are they getting what their brief asked for. And also being able to analyse models for wind loading, solar shading, internal heating, lighting, all of these things that we can do with a 3D model of a building. If we have the knowledge embedded within the materials, we can really reduce the risk of getting the design wrong. Everybody's a professional on a construction project, but we still see buildings underperforming against their expected BREEAMs, and we see the odd strange thing happen, like buildings setting fire to transit vans in London, and using modelling we can try and reduce some of that. The reduction of waste on project is critical to the success of the UK construction industry. So to help us come in on time on budget, the BIM process of collaborating more often and reducing siloed working does mean that we have less wasted time, less rework. And the idea of designing for constructability, involving the contractor earlier, showing them what's been designed, looking in detail, and that front loading of the project means we're designing something that can be built rather than going through the process of designing something and then getting a contractor involved, finding out where it's gone wrong and winding it back. So that reduces the rework, and it allows us to effectively program the way we're going to build things. So with that reduced risk and that reduced waste, as well as a better design, we will almost certainly every time improve the client satisfaction with the construction industry. And we can also produce much, much better handover information, which means they've got something to move forward with lifecycle management and have a much more circular approach to operational costs and construction costs and delivery costs altogether. In terms of how product manufacturers fit into the puzzle of BIM, in terms of those details I've just been through, having the products that are likely to make it to the end of the project already designed in early when we show it to the client means we can build that confidence. So it's easy to believe that manufacturers have a small part to play in this, that their data only matters when we hand it over. But in terms of models and data, every single word I mentioned in the previous slides really does matter for product manufacturers. In terms of what BIM actually means, the acronym is Building Information Modelling, but it does get confused with BIM Level 2, which is the UK initiative. And probably the best definition of BIM that I tend to use, it comes from the MBS, which is the means by which everyone can understand a building through the use of a digital model. That model might not be 3D, it might be a data model, but this is the concept of BIM, making sure everybody understands the building through the use of a digital model. Level 2 BIM was the government's initiative to cement BIM as the standard for delivering projects by 2016. That slipped a little, but what is Level 2 BIM? Well, Level 2 is about bringing the people, the processes and the standards together so we have a consistent way of using BIM on UK construction projects. The Level 2 org website, which is the place where all of the standards live, and there's a lot of good advice in there, that describes Level 2 in quite a good way by saying the adoption of BIM Level 2 by the construction and asset management industry requires organisations and individuals to embrace change and accept that traditional roles within the supply chain and client organisations may need to be redefined to successfully implement the new processes and information management requirements. That's something that takes a little bit of time to absorb, but what they're trying to get across is this is about an industry journey of industry change, and throughout that change there are going to be new roles emerge, but it doesn't mean that we're going to start losing professions. We all heard in 2010-11 that BIM was going to be the death of the quantity surveyor. Of course it's not, but it does mean that quantity surveyors have to change the way they work from a 2D way to a 3D way and a data-rich way of managing their approach to the industry. In terms of that journey, the idea was that we framed the industry in terms of 3 levels. Level 0 was the industry that I joined, where drawing boards, a little bit of CAD, very much siloed working, we'd draw it all up and we'd deliver it, and then somebody would build it. Level 1 is there to formalise things in terms of working together. Level 1 isn't the default for the industry. It's assumed that it is because we all share things over the internet every now and again, and we all use CAD. That's not true. A lot of people are still at level 0, and they need to go through that process of bringing their standard procedures up to level 1 before addressing level 2. Level 2 is relatively well defined. What level 2 really is about is a collaborative approach to delivering a digital model, whether that's 3D or 2D or a mix of both, that is useful throughout the project and improves the handover afterwards. As much as that can sound a little complicated, there's only 3 deliverables that have to be there for it to be a level 2 project. You must still hand over the 2D PDFs. That doesn't change yet. If there are models on the project, you have to hand them over to the client. That is part of the level 2 process. You've created that rich data source. And Kobe data is the key handover format for level 2 BIM in the UK. So it's a lot of the same information that we've always collected, but we're bringing it into one place and linking it together. It's sometimes displayed as a very colourful spreadsheet, but it's well defined, it has a British standard behind it, and it's about the construction industry taking our first steps into delivering good data. And that data doesn't come from the architect in all cases, it doesn't come from the engineers or even the contractor. A lot of the data that matters for operating the building that we capture during construction comes from the product manufacturers. And it's not new data, it's data that you know about your products. The thing that's missing is the structure. So we need to get our products into a format that we can absorb into the project processes so we can deliver the structured data in Kobe format. And as much as there's only 3 deliverables, there are some key things that have to happen throughout the project for it to be a level 2 process. There must be a defined information requirement. If we don't know what information our clients want, we can scrap around in the dark trying to find it and hand over something, but that's not level 2. We have to understand what the clients need. And then you set out collaborative working processes, which we can all agree to do BIM together, shake hands, and it's all nicey-nicey, and then it will probably fail when the project goes through any change. That's why the BIM execution plan comes into play. So we have a requirement, we have a response, and we have a contractual obligation to deploy our plan to deliver those requirements. One of the key things that level 2 sets out is that we don't just gather all of our data and when we hand over the building, hand over that data at the end and say, surprise, there's the data that you asked for, we think it's right. We go through a process of data exchange and validation. So at key points in the contract, we hand over the data that is available at that point that answers the questions that the client needs to answer at that point. But that process of exchanging information, handing over a data set, is not something we're very used to. And a lot of that data, the further you go into the project, the more manufacturer data goes in there. So it's a process that everybody has to learn how to do. And because we're handling more data than we've ever handled before, and we're structuring it in a way where it can be easily read and interpreted, we have to be security minded. We can't create all this data on behalf of our clients and leave it on USB sticks on trains. We have to be careful with that project data. And if it's seriously secure data, it's confidential, we have to know that from the information requirements and plan for that. And the idea is if we go through that process of defining requirements, planning to deliver them, testing along the way and delivering valuable information exchanges in a secure way, then we can secure better outcomes for our end users and have more fun and more profit and better designs on all of our projects. In 2016, I created this graphic roughly based on the concepts of Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. And the idea at that point was trying to ascertain whether we'd actually got level 2 BIM across the chasm to the point where it was definitely going to be adopted and wouldn't slip back and wouldn't fail in the manner of a Betamax. I believed at that point, and I still do, that we are definitely into the early majority phase. BIM is happening, it's not going away, and it is going to increase in adoption. What I'm not sure I got right at the time was that we'd be passing into the late majority phase this year. The late majority phase are people who feel more pushed into adopting rather than people who are excited to adopt, like the innovators and the early adopters. The early majority see the benefit of adopting and try and take a business advantage. Those late majority people, there's a commercial pressure there. And some, they may fail to adopt and leave it too late. Because what's really interesting about what the UK construction industry is doing is we're trying to cross 2 chasms in very quick succession. Before level 2 is fully embedded in the industry, we're trying to define what level 3 is all about, which is an even more collaborative way of working and designing to inform smart cities and smart buildings and trying to include more open formats for model types. After I drew this, the UK BIM Alliance set the target of BIM as business as usual by 2020. For me, that's where the bridge comes into the diagram. If you're not on that bridge by 2020, you may find it difficult to adopt and might struggle to win some contracts afterwards. Getting product manufacturer data and objects and knowledge into the design model is critical for success going forward. But what we can't do is continually expand the design team and put everybody in at that early stage and have enormous meetings with every potential manufacturer at the table. So we need the knowledge into the project, but not necessarily all of the people. And BIM gives us a mechanism for that. And this is where BIM objects and BIM data do come in very, very useful. We have a number of ways of getting manufacturer data into the design process. In terms of a BIM project, you have two key approaches. You can download and install data-rich models of objects into the design process, which I'm not going to perpetuate the myth that getting a manufacturer's object into an early stage design model is self-specification. But what it does mean is your brand and your unique selling points are known to the design team, introduced to the contractor if they've not noticed you before, and your technical qualities, the things that make your product better than your competitors, that's known in the model. But there is another alternative, which is product data. So this is allowing the design team to use generic objects, but supplement it with the data specifically about your product. So whether that's about fire doors, different fire ratings, different glass ratings, weights, those kind of things, we can start pulling that in. In terms of making the decision between modelled objects and product data with Proctor Group, my approach was to come and talk to the team here, because it's not a classic decision. Whereas if it's something that's very spatial, like a piece of furniture, objects very much play a part in that decision. If it's something that's totally embedded and never seen, never maintained, and doesn't really have that bigger impact on the design process, then data matters more, because it's about getting the right data handed over at the end. The Proctor Group set of products really do straddle both, because as much as they're not a classic maintainable asset, the approach to using their products in the design process improves the thermal and acoustic properties of the design. And what's really interesting about their approach is that it moves layers within the built fabric to different places to achieve better results. And one of the problems we discussed when I came to see the guys at Blair Gallery was that even though it was the right solution for a project, it was hard to get onto some projects because it had been designed too fully to make that switch to where the layers were within the structure of the building. People didn't want to do that redesign because it takes time and it adds cost. So as much as it's not a classic maintainable asset like a window, it made an awful lot of sense to model the Proctor Group products to ensure that when it comes to making those design changes, we could take out a generic wall and replace it with a Proctor Group wall, which has all of that knowledge that we need in the project to make sure we get the sound right, the insulation right, the air tightness right. It's not about how we've modelled the thickness of a membrane. It's what that membrane does for the design is why we went down the model route. So it wasn't a case of us modelling a chunk of a membrane and putting it there so people could download a piece of membrane and try and insert that into their walls. We created wall systems and floor systems to try and ensure that people were designing with the best knowledge available to use these solutions appropriately and get the right results. It was something I hadn't thought of before, that the rework of selecting products might stop products getting selected even if they were the right product for the project. And we went away and we designed some prototypes that we thought would work, and we tested them and we got some really great results. So we decided to proceed with the project, and the set of models that we're introducing in this webinar are now available live on the website. Now I'm going to focus a little bit on product data templates. Work on product data templates as part of the UK approach to BIM is not finished, unfortunately. That's because it's complicated. It's not something you could sit down and write. It involves an awful lot of people and an awful lot of knowledge. And there's some great people working on it. UK BIM Alliance are working on it. We've also got the standards bodies looking at it with the SEN standards from Europe and the international ISO standards looking at it. Because aligning our information around product data and providing those templates for people to fill in a consistent way means we can start comparing products with products in a much better way. And that isn't a UK specific problem. That is a global problem. So I'm going to try and discuss the reality of the situation around product data templates without making it sound like there is a ready-built solution for you to just go and pick up and it's all going to work perfectly well. Asset owners, architects, specifiers, contractors and facilities managers all need data about the products that go into buildings. They need different things from it at different times, so creating a template that suits all those needs is actually quite a difficult thing. So what we need in terms of manufacturers bringing information to the table, we need those data sheets, which is a filled-in product data template, to be structured. So that's the purpose of the template, to provide structure to the information that you already probably have embedded on your websites, in your brochures, in your PDFs. So that can be imported and compared digitally and brought into designs digitally and tested against various requirements in a digital way. But it's actually quite complicated to find the right PDT for your industry, for your product, and it can take a little bit of detective work to get to the bottom of it. First thing to check is the MBS toolkit, the BIM toolkit. There are a few thousand definitions in there of various things. You might find a direct hit that works for you, that's already been created. Then CIBSI, they also have a number of templates available. That's another great place to go looking to see if there's something already built that you can adopt. And then newer to the party is the BRE templater tool, which has been developed with ActivePlan and is relatively new, so there's not as much content on there, but they have a good pattern for collecting data. So those three are useful places to go and see if you can find something you can use. It may not be there. If it isn't, if you find that you can't find a template that actually meets your needs, then you need to speak to your industry body if you have one. So there are industry bodies for many of the parts of the manufacturing world, and they can help you create the PDT. You can work together to deliver that to the market, and then it could be absorbed into CIBSI or MBS or BRE. There's a discussion to be had there. There's a bit of R&D that needs doing, but you should get some support from your industry body. And if that's still not working, the BIM for M2 are there to help with this process. Contact them through their website and explain that you've been through the process, you've tried to find out the information, and it simply isn't there and you can't find anyone to help. There are commercial people who can help you with this. There are software companies who have solutions that would be more than willing to discuss. And if you want to pay for accelerated help, that's what you get when you go to these people. So you do have choices, but exhaust the stuff that's already been done before you start calling people to try and find out how you create a PDT, because what we don't want is multiple versions of the same thing appearing in different places. So we don't have a standard template. We have a number of standard templates, meaning we still don't have a standard template. We've discussed the differences between a model-based approach and a PDT approach, and in some cases you may need to do both, or you may want to do both. But it's good to review some of the key decisions you could make. So in terms of models, does the shape and size of your product impact the design process? If it does, if you're going to be bigger or smaller or taller or whatever than somebody else's in the design process, having some objects might be a useful thing packed onto the design process. It may be that you don't need to model your details up to LOD 5, which is level of detail 5, which is a full technical model of everything within your product. You might be able to drop that back to a 3 or a 2, which just represents the shape and size and general connections of what your product does. So people can start using it in a design model. Another key thing when deciding whether models are appropriate are the aesthetics. Does your product look better than your competitors? Is it going to be exposed in the finished building? Then an object, in terms of a 3D object, certainly has more weight than using a generic object with your data against it. Does switching your product into a project require design changes? If it needs to go back to the architect or the engineer for changes, they're going to appreciate it if they can get model content and do the job quickly. Is your product part of a key system? Do other things depend on what you're doing and the size of your product? If so, objects might make sense. And one of the things that gets overlooked are people asking, do the senior management in your business know whether your technical team are taking phone calls asking for objects? And another key indicator of whether you should do it is, do your competitors have objects? If you're in a world where your competitors already have objects, people might already just be going to their website and using theirs as standard in a design process. It doesn't mean that won't get replaced with your product later. You may get swapped in and their objects have been used and you get the work. But if they've done it, they see benefit in it, it may be worth considering it. So there's some of the key considerations around whether it's worth having your objects modeled. When it comes to product data templates, are your products a standard size with competitors? So if the object's always going to look the same, and it's always going to take up the same amount of space and have the same requirements for space around it, all of that geometric information, the data template might make perfect sense. Just provide your unique selling points in a structured way. Are your unique selling points around better performance or improved warranties and environmental performance? If they are, you need to tell people that information needs to get into the team as early as you can, because that is really integral information to making those decisions about whether you stay in the project or get swapped out later. And are you having to provide data in multiple formats to different people? Well, we hear that one contractor wants it this way, another one wants it that way, and you've got no confidence that they're asking for the same stuff in the same way at any point. If you can say you work to a template, we deliver it to a standard, then the onus is on them to take the information from your standard approach and put it where they need it if they need something else. And is there an industry standard product data template, and are your competitors filling it in? If there's an industry standard there, it doesn't take you long to put the knowledge that you already have into that template and provide it to people. If that last one's there, even if you haven't made a decision on whether you need models or whether BIM's right for you yet, if there is a standard product data template, fill it out and put it somewhere where people can get it on your website. It's a quick win. Some people will come to your website, take it away, and never have to make the phone call. If you'd like a little more information on what I've just been through, I did pen an article with GoBIM some time ago, which is still available. The link should be on screen now, but it will be made available afterwards as well. The image of the BIM cat was there really to describe the difference between what information has to be modelled and what information can live quite happily within a product data template. Often when talking about BIM objects, the conversation turns to BIM libraries. As a business, we've taken a decision not to provide a BIM library, so we can provide impartial advice on how to create the best information and where to put it. But that's not to say that the libraries don't provide value. They do. The thing with the libraries is they all offer a different offering. So in terms of which one's right for your business, if any, you really do need to talk to them. And I know most of the people at most of the libraries because they've taken objects from us and from manufacturers we've worked with. In terms of what they offer exposure. They offer templates to try and help you get things right for their library, so there's consistency across the library. The debate is out whether that is fully working yet, whether you can have total confidence in everything you just download from one library all hitting the same mark. There has been an evolution, there has been a journey. Some of the older stuff may not be as good as some of the newer stuff. It's one of those parts of the industry that are currently going through a bit of a change, because when they started out, creating objects, putting them there so people can download them was the business model. Now we're moving towards version 2 of the BIM libraries. They're starting to add more value with new plugins, new content, more support. So they all are diversifying and getting a bit different. So I wouldn't promote any one library, but what I would do is promote talking to them all rather than just jumping to the first one you've heard of. I've put a few up on the screen. Some are data based, some are model based, and some you will have heard of, and some you may not have. Very much worth doing your research on these ones. When it comes to the approach you want to choose to take advantage of BIM and bring BIM into your business, there is value in talking to independent BIM consultancies like myself, and there are others available, and there's lots of good people out there. You may have a local one you choose to talk to, or feel free to call me. I'd love to hear from you. What that independence does, we try and give you good solid advice without a sales pitch of any ongoing solution where we want to come and help. So that may mean we do some modelling for you. We might point you in the right direction of the right company or the right library for you to work with. I don't want to use this session as a sell, but if you want to have a conversation, my details will be made available after the end of the presentation. That's all of the content I've prepared for today, so I do hope that was useful and you now have more of an insight into what BIM means for product manufacturers. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A session. We're going to have a look at your questions and we're going to respond to as many of them as we can. Thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keira Proctor and I'm the Managing Director here at the Proctor Group Limited. First of all, if I just apologise for some of the teething problems we had earlier on in the webinar. Frustrating for the team because they tried it all morning and made sure it was working perfectly. And it's always the case that when you go live, it doesn't work properly. Thanks very much to John. I thought that was a really informative webinar. We do have some questions. Please feel free to add more onto the YouTube chat and we'll try and answer them as we go. John, one that came in was if manufacturers prepare shop drawings as such or issue BIM objects models.
I think it's still a case of both, where we want objects to get into the design phase as early as we can and try and help us get our designs right. But when it comes to specialist content for various parts of the design process, the architecture studios don't have to detail everything. A lot of the specialist manufacturers and specialist subcontractors will still want to provide those shop drawings. Whether they do that in model format or traditional format, that's part of their evolution. But BIM objects don't take away that need for all specialist subcontractors to provide us with shop drawings just yet.
Okay. How do I know which of the Proctor Group BIM files are suitable for my project?
Right, so if you if you know what kind of system you're looking at, whether it's a timber frame or you've got a steel frame, everything's set out on the website in a very logical way, so you can see what type of build-up you're using and choose the right one. But the team at Proctor have a good quality technical team who would be happy to hear from you, and they could talk you through the right ones for the situation. So we haven't modelled every single option that you could possibly create, but we have modelled a large selection of them, and they should be able to help you get the right one.
Okay, one that came in via email, what are the UK BIM Alliance doing for manufacturers to promote BIM?
Okay, the UK BIM Alliance have set up a product data working group because they've acknowledged that PDTs, the product data templates, aren't all there, and there are things that can be done to help manufacturers. So the UK BIM Alliance are a cross-industry group of professionals from various parts of the BIM network and beyond who want to try and make UK BIM adoption level 2 by 2020. So what we're trying to do with that working group is define a set way forward and try and harmonise some of the things that have been going on, because there have been a lot of really good initiatives, but they've not always gone in the same direction.
Okay, thanks, John. Tom has asked, he's mentioned that you touched on level 3, and has asked, how does that work, and when would be looking to adopt it?
Okay, so level 3 is not something anyone can adopt just yet. It's currently essentially a government-led R&D project to find out where we go next after level 2. We know some things about it. It will use the IFC schema for the next set of data. We will try and bring teams together, so remove more silos, and we will be looking to feed into smart cities. But we are very much trying to make it clear that you have to do level 1, then level 2, and you can't adopt level 3 until it's defined. So please concentrate on the earlier levels first, and then we'll get to level 3 when it's ready.
Okay, and Chris has asked a good question regarding specifiers are split into those that are happy to use manufacturer objects and those that actually want to create their own in-house build-ups and then attach the manufacturer's data. Do you think one of these will win?
Oh, it's a fine question. Do I think one of them will win? No, I think we'll continue for a long time with a little bit of both, and most practices will take good objects that work for them from manufacturers for certain elements, and some things they'll build themselves. Hopefully we can get less and less people being forced into build themselves. I know in our practice, the Niven architecture side of our studio, we go looking for objects, don't find them, and have to build them ourselves. In some cases we would have just built it because it makes sense, but I don't think there's a winner, but there's definitely room for more manufacturers to deliver more objects and more data into the scene, because we quite frankly don't have the knowledge on the design side to pull all of that information that the manufacturers and the specialist suppliers have into the design model in the way we need to.
Okay, 2 quite similar questions regarding smaller architectural practices and how they can get more proactively involved with BIM or more BIM compliant.
Okay, so first things to do are 3 things. You can spend some time on the B1M website looking at some of the content there. There's lots of short, really interesting videos in the BIM for Beginners section. They are all free to access and lots of rich information in there to learn from. Also, go to the level2.org website and get the standards. Doing BIM without the standards is just trying your best to use the software. And when it comes to adopting the right modelling software for you, don't just take the first one that you see. Get demos from the software companies, have a look at them all, make the decisions that fit with the way you like to draw things in your office. And the price is coming down on these authoring softwares to the point where it doesn't make much difference whether you're buying the next version of a 2D piece of kit or a 3D piece of kit. So the adoption cost is coming down as well.
Okay, I'm just trying to see where I've got these questions here. As product data changes over time and as products develop, how do you see manufacturers maintaining up-to-date data over multiple sales channels?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Hopefully, people will get to the point where we can augment models with data a little bit easier. And this is one of the objects for one of the cases for PDTs, because they can be changed easier than you can change an object. So if we can get to the point where we're linking models to PDTs more successfully in terms of the plugins and the approaches, that'll help. But for now, we have to accept there is a little bit of work to be done. When data changes, somebody has to change that data. Over time, we will change that into something a lot more slick.
Steve's asked, I've actually not heard of this, some people using a process called Compass. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the BIM for M2 is a manufacturer's group to adopt BIM, and they produced a tool in 2015 called the BIM Compass. And that is there to help manufacturers understand whether now's the right time for them to adopt BIM and how seriously they need to take it now as a threat or an opportunity to their business. And what you do with that is you download the tool and you fill out key information like what sectors you work in, what kind of turnover your business has, what countries you're working in, and that gives you a scale of you must be doing BIM now, you're behind the curve, or you might want to wait out a little while and watch what's going to happen in your sector. What is interesting about that is that it was produced in 2015, so when you do get your result, it's probably worth looking one up on the scale. So it tells you to keep an eye on it, and next one up is start considering it. You probably want to start considering it now with the other side of the mandate date.
Okay, James has asked, do you feel using BIM is the most efficient method in terms of time and cost of designing a product, or does it depend on the size and complexity of the product?
In terms of products, BIM is always the answer. It's just which flavour. Is it objects or is it data? Because we have a mandate and we are trying to make sure all of our projects are going that way, not just public sector. In terms of projects, our practice uses our Revit suite and modelling on all projects of all sizes. Where it doesn't always make sense is to do your first sketches in there. There are other tools out there, and there's still place for a bit of tracing paper and a pen every now and again. But the use of BIM on all size projects makes a lot of sense for me. And if your products are relatively simple from a manufacturer point of view, models are quite easy to create, so they won't be a massive expense. And if you are a relatively data heavy company and your products are very rich in data and the data is really critical to what you sell, you probably know that information already. It's just putting it into different formats so people can cross-reference it and use it in a more efficient way.
Okay, so a couple of questions here about manufacturers. One, how does a manufacturer submit objects? And secondly, how can product manufacturers protect their designs from being copied?
Okay, so in terms of submitting them, to get to the libraries, you need to get in touch with the libraries. There is a hosting fee with most libraries, and the manufacturers are where the money goes into that system at the moment rather than the designers. The designers don't often pay to download content. What we are seeing is some people using the libraries for exposure and making those more accessible to more people. But the approach we've taken with Proctor is to pop them on the website where people can get to them. So it's not about submitting them, it's about just hosting them and making sure that you're confident that they're good by getting them prepared by someone who knows how to prepare objects. The other part of that question, bear with me a second. Being copied. If you modelled everything that you do in the highest level of detail you possibly can, you are putting a lot of IP in there. So you need to kind of cut your cloth accordingly to what you do. If there's so much data in those models that mean you're going to risk your IP, but it doesn't help the design team, you probably want to think about winding that back a little bit. But if you do have to provide quite rich models and people take them into their tools, they can change that data, they can change it. So you are hoping that people don't steal your work, but you will have the classical legal rights that you've always had to protect your IP. So if you do find out somebody's stealing your work, that situation hasn't changed. You just have to think carefully about what information you put out there into the world.
And in terms of the best software for implementing BIM, have you got any advice on that?
It depends what you do entirely. Personally, as a practice, we chose to go down the Autodesk route because they have the widest adoption and the tools do what we needed to do. But if you are not a model author, if you don't design buildings or objects in detail, a design authoring software might not be for you. Tools like Inventor are quite useful in the manufacturing space. What you need to know is that you can create IFCs. If you can create IFCs, then people can use your information in different solutions. So you want tools that can get you to that industry open format. So you can create what you need to do, and you can use your own skills and styles of working in your business, but you can collaborate with the wider world. And also, it doesn't matter which software you're using. If you can fill out those PDTs, you're gonna help people with structured data.
Thanks, John. Okay, I think that's all the questions for now. Just wanted to thank everyone again. I really enjoyed listening to that webinar, and John's been working with our business for quite a while now, doing training with our sales team, technical teams, marketing, etc., so that we're fully informed about BIM and make sure that we're talking technically about it out in the marketplace and certainly representing that within our business. I just had an IFS. I'm not sure what that is.
Probably IFC. The IFC is the Industry Foundation class. It's an open format for models, and it is the master format which you can take Kobe from. So Autodesk Revit, Bentley EcoSim, Graphisoft Archicad, they can all work with the IFC format, as can a lot of the supplementary softwares around the BIM scene, like Celibri for model checking and various things for doing wind loading. So it's a really useful format for the industry. It's kind of glib to say it's the industry's PDF, but it has some analogies with that most tools can get it open and you can see that information. And it does add a little bit of IP protection in there because things can't be changed quite as readily in IFC.
Great. Thanks for answering that. After the webinar, you will all be emailed a replay pack, which we're happy that you share that with your wider business or others who you may find be interested in this. And we'll also be issuing a survey. So if you have time to complete that, please do, because it does help us make sure that each webinar we do is better than the last one and that the content is relevant, the timings and the length of the webinars as well. So if you do have time, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again, John, and have a nice afternoon, everybody.